Before we get too far, I should probably explain what's going on here. For the past few weeks, I've been working on putting a server together for me and some friends to play on, as well as anyone watching this video, of course. Anyway, the server just went up at the time of recording this clip, so I was ready to get going. After swimming to some land, I found myself in a spruce forest, where I immediately got my first tools. However, progress quickly halted when I heard zombie noises. An almost surface spawner is cool, but I wasn't really interested in basing here, so after a little bit of caving, I was out. In the dead of night, I was traveling down the coast when I noticed some sweet berries. Honestly, they aren't great, but I needed food pretty badly. Apparently not as badly as the skeleton guarding them, who wanted to send me back to spawn right there and then. Through my masterful strategy, I made it out alive. After making landfall on the opposite coast, my first priority was sleeping the thunderstorm away. Wool wasn't too hard to come by, and soon I had slept and was back on my way. I set up another camp soon after where I cooked up some food and sorted my inventory out. Not more than a couple hundred blocks away from here, I stumbled across a breathtaking village, which I decided would be my starter base. First, I imprisoned the locals, which was a pretty chill time. However, the fact remained, I was poor as dirt, and this is not ideal for controlling an economy. This meant mining was next, and thankfully, I dug into a nice big cave that quickly got me up to 2 stacks of iron. This iron would prove invaluable as I began trading, as did the spruce saplings that Starlight was able to go retrieve. This is where we get to my first of many mistakes, which was forgetting to record. This unfortunately will become a common theme throughout the video. As far as I can remember, all I did was trade up to a diamond pickaxe and a couple other mediocre tools. Logically in progression, now I needed diamonds. I did of course plan to buy all my diamond gear from villagers, but I need diamonds for an enchantment table and some other random stuff. Nothing really went wrong with this except for just a couple wardens that may or may not have been a risk to my health and safety. With 14 diamonds to my name, I finally headed to the surface where I was back to chopping trees. After chopping a few too many trees down and feeling a little bit like a villain from a children's movie, I had diamond armor, which would accelerate my progression. I unfortunately couldn't find the footage for this, but I set up a level 30 enchanting table where I used my first few levels from villager trading to get some basic enchants. At this point I had a minor distraction where I decided that I needed bamboo, so I hopped on a horse and headed to the jungle. I had to ditch the horse at one point, but don't worry, I went back for it. After this hour-long tangent, I was back and had bamboo to make scaffolding. In the meantime, Starlight had finished our XP farm, which was made out of 2 spawners that we found super close to the surface. I sat here for a while just giving my gear some slight upgrades. All this gear was great, but when I looked around, all I saw was an ugly, cobbled-together town. Unfortunately, resources were still a little tight, so I couldn't really do much except for add some bushes, but these did help quite a bit. Soon after, me and Starlight made a start on a small iron farm. It didn't take long to complete, but a steady source of iron was just what we needed. I also did some smaller projects like sprucing up the villager breeder and adding some lighting. Starlight decided that we needed to convert all our villager houses to be cherry themed, so he did that while I worked on the lighting. Around this time, I moved all my stuff into an actual house, but I forgot to record again. I'm actually pretty proud of how well I was able to maximize the space and fit everything I needed. Over the next little while, Starlight improved his house, as well as finished the villager transformation, and I started construction of a villager hall. The first few villagers went pretty quick, but my goal of getting the villagers to trade every enchanted book quickly turned out to be an awful grind. Once again, I didn't record and finished a lot of the trading hall. Unfortunately, I still had no good source of emeralds, so I couldn't really buy anything. This pushed us to build a raid farm, but it needed a lot of resources that we just didn't have. I ended up heading off to a swamp for slime which we needed, and Starlight went mining for the large quantity of redstone it requires. Swamp was a bit of a walk, but that's fine because I wanted to do a more mundane task like walking anyway. I was going to grab some frogs, but unfortunately I forgot how frog spawns work and accidentally deleted them with a water bucket. After walking home for 30 minutes, the next big resource we needed was wood, so in between cycling librarian trades, I chopped trees. Guess what? I didn't record finishing the trading hall or collecting the rest of the raid farm materials. Anyway, we're here on the coast of an ocean with all the materials to build our raid farm. For the first time in history, we had a use for chest boats, as we needed to bring our materials across the ocean. We did have a schematic, so we placed it down and immediately started building. The building process was pretty boring, so I'll just skip to where we had a little platform in the sky. Off of this, I built the item collection system, while Starlight built the spawn platform and kill chamber. I had unnecessarily decided to make the storage system extremely large and equip it with shulker loaders for later on. This did slightly complicate the building process, but mostly it just took extra time. As far as we could tell, everything was complete and built properly, so it was time for our first test. We unfortunately were missing the sword enchants required to operate the farm. This was pretty annoying because the walk back was pretty far. From there, I literally had to sell every piece of wood we owned for emeralds to buy this necessary sword enchants. But after going broke, we had what we needed. We also had the issue of no bad omen, which meant a super incredibly fun side quest to a pillager outpost. We ended up just using chunk base to find one and built a portal straight to it. The forest that surrounded it made it slightly difficult to find a captain, but we eventually got one and headed back to the raid farm. After turning everything on, it started working, but our hearts sank when after just a few seconds it stopped. We also noticed that very few pillagers were falling, and it seemed like the farm was broken. From what we could tell, it was only spawning one wave of the raid, then failing to spawn the rest. It does rely on some kind of weird mechanics, so there were just so many things that could have been causing this. For about 20 minutes we investigated until coming to the conclusion that paper was the culprit. Now you're probably wondering how paper could be an issue. But we're not talking about actual paper, we're talking about the server version of paper that this server runs on. Paper makes optimizations to the game that help the server perform better, which unfortunately include a mechanic that allows raid farms to work. We had figured out the issue, but the solution wasn't so clear. Our first thought was that we could build a different raid farm design, but that would be a lot of work and may still not work. We also thought about how these optimizations could affect our future farms and realized that our server could no longer be run on paper. I spent that night taking down the server, moving everything over to a fabric server, and figuring out replacements for our plugins. This was the moment of truth. Did this fix our farm? Thankfully it did, and our farm was pouring out resources like emeralds, totems, and a number of other really useful resources. The emeralds came in handy in maxing out my gear, which I accidentally did off camera. However, what I did do on camera is heal up all my gear at the XP farm. I was finally prepared for a trip to the end, which would start with another trek across the overworld. Someone had already opened the portal and defeated the dragon, so at least that part was easy. At this point my computer was nearly full with footage, so I wasn't recording as much, which is why you will miss my most costly mistake. On the end islands, I had decided that I would use the pearls I had bought from Brandiflan not long before to speed up my walk through the end. This is where tragedy struck. I attempted to pearl across a gap that was just slightly too large and found myself plummeting to my death. In that moment, I tried to think of anything I could do to save myself, but in just seconds, I was dead. All of my maxed out gear gone, and I had to start over from square one. Not having many options, I found what I could from my chest and headed off to the raid farm. After getting a few stacks of emerald blocks, I was essentially able to buy everything back. But I was still relying on an awful XP farm, so this took an entire evening of grinding. After 8 hours of work, I had gotten back to where I was before and was ready to continue my end expedition. I must have learned from my mistake though, because I slowly crouched across every bridge and soon had what I was looking for. Once I had that elytra, I kicked it into high gear and looted end city after end city until I had over 2 stacks of shulker shells and more than enough backup elytras. Having everything I needed, I found the closest gateway and soon was back in my bedroom. At this point, it was all about wealth, and I had very little beyond the bare minimum I needed for survival. The easiest way to accumulate wealth would be an AFK session at the raid farm. However, currently, the raid farm cannot be AFK due to the funny game mechanic where you eventually starve to death. This can be countered with the use of a beacon, but I had barely even been to a fortress, so I obviously had no beacons to my name. The elytra made it pretty easy to find a fortress in a soul sand valley, which I could fly back and forth from to get new spawns. This is probably the quickest I've ever gotten 3 skulls, because in under 20 minutes I had them. I grabbed the 4 soul sand and some obsidian that I needed and was back in the end. I spawned the wither under the bedrock end return portal and hit it like a helpless pinata until I had the nether star. I took this and all my emeralds to set up a full beacon at the raid farm. All that I had to do was AFK for the next 20 hours. When I came back to my computer, I had thousands of emeralds and more totems than I could use in a lifetime. What item would every player need in their everyday life that's hard to get? To me, shulker boxes fit this description perfectly. If I could figure out a shulker farm, I could be the sole supplier of an incredibly important commodity super early on. The resources were a little challenging to get, especially the 1,000 plus scaffolding, but I got everything together. I still had to find an end city that wasn't too difficult to get to, so I killed a couple dragons to open up new gateways. Luckily, not many dragon kills in, I had my gateway to an end city. The gateway was right over the void, so the first order of business was building a bridge. Next, I needed to make a flat area by clearing chorus trees and mining endstone. From there, the farm was basically just filling in a schematic, so although it took a little while, I could sit back and relax. Getting the shulker in proved slightly challenging, but I managed, and soon the farm was up and running. In just minutes, I had stacks of shulker shells, which meant this farm was a resounding success. I AFK'd overnight to come back the next afternoon to over 3,000 shells. And while this is great, at this point my computer is completely full of footage for this video, so I need to edit this and get this out. A ton of progress has been made since this last clip, and I can't wait to show it off in the next video. Because if I make this video any longer, it may literally take an eternity to edit. I literally just need to get something out because I haven't uploaded in almost 3 months, and I'm sure that isn't great for subscriber retention. Lastly, I want to invite anyone to join my server, which there will be a link to in the description. I don't know how well this video will do because of how long it took, but I hope everyone enjoyed it, and I am very surprised if you managed to watch this far.